So our next speaker is Joy Su from Stanford University, and Joy is presenting her work on open data standard and analysis framework towards response equity in local governments. And this is a joint work with the city of San Jose. Joy?
I'm Joy. I am a CS PhD student at Stanford, and I'm here today with Ramya, Edwin, and Christine, and we're presenting on open data standard and analysis framework towards response equity in local governments. And this work, as mentioned, is really done with collaboration with DataKind, a nonprofit that works on social good applications, as well as the San Jose Mayor's Office of Tech and Innovation and the city of San Jose itself. So to give a brief intro, I want to talk about San Jose. So San Jose is an incredible city. It is the 10th largest city in the US and the capital of Silicon Valley as we know it. We're incredibly culturally diverse. English isn't the primary language in 57% of households. But in recent years, inequitable growth have really exacerbated issues like the digital divide. And so here's where we come in. So we are the San Jose's Mayor's Office of Technology and Innovation, and we really work to democratize the economic benefits of technology. And our goal is to research ways to use the city's open data ethically and in ways that drive equitable outcomes for constituents. So a bit more about open data. Studies have shown that there's a lot of gaps in current open data usability. For instance, data can be inconsistent in different formats at different available fields and encodings, and linking data sets that would provide additional needed context. That's very difficult. And the impact of that is that city officials and researchers and citizens alike have a lot of difficulty in navigating open data flows. Similarly, running these analyses on existing data requires a lot of specialized technical expertise, and many open data sets lack public analyses. And the impact of that is that users don't fully engage with or understand the data that's been collected. And the open data benefits of transparency and accountability and better policymaking are vastly undermined. So really looking at the pain points in the current workflow of open data inspires to rethink a new framework. We want to introduce a framework that allows us to iterate very quickly with external parties and as well as internal departments, as well as just create a better workflow that people can actually use open data and better yet understand what the equity and different measures we can take from it. And so here I'll pass on to Ramya to talk a bit about related work.
Thank you, Joy. So to inform our work, we conducted a review of available relevant literature. So first, we reviewed open data tools in cities, both internationally and within the US, with some key findings highlighted here. Within the US, we see that more data mature cities, such as San Francisco and New York City, have data standards of various scopes that have been created to guide open data portal users. Other more data mature US cities have dedicated resources that support and conduct equity-focused work using open data, like in the city of San Jose. Of note, we highlight Long Beach, Austin, and Chattanooga here. And all of these demonstrate concrete steps taken by local governments to highlight inequity in government service provision. However, this literature review highlights an opportunity for the development of tools that help reduce technical barriers of equity-focused analyses for other parties, such as city residents themselves. We then came to understand that of all common open local government data sets, those focused on emergency response were highly relevant and available across cities. Existing studies have highlighted some of the work in this space, but this was an area that the city of San Jose has not focused too much on in the past. Therefore, our three-part framework is meant to expand the scope of analyses that interested parties can conduct, which Joy will now dive into.
So we really propose a three-part framework to tackle this problem. So the first is a US census-linked API. The second is centralized equity analyses. And the third is an open data standard. So that in our US census-linked API, we create an interface that augments government data sets with information from the US Census. Essentially, we're mapping location attributes, whether in zip code or lat long, to census tracts. And in doing so, we can supplement data with a lot of metadata, such as median age and schooling, gender, race, household income, etc. And this really helps us identify communities that local departments have historically underserved. And after we've augmented our data, we create a centralized equity analyses to quantitatively measure government resource and service allocation. So we're trying to compare the quality of government resources for different groups, but quality of resources is really defined differently for every government data set. It can be access speed of access to a certain service or the equality of resources, etc. And so we create a platform that allows users to define their own quality of resource metric. And so an example of that can include response time for emergency responses in local governments. And so after we define this quality of resource metric, we can then test for statistically significant differences provided across different groups. And we can thus report fairness across democratic factors such as race and ethnicity and income. And we provide summary statistics and correlation between demographic measures and quality of government service. We then propose an open data standard as current public data sets, especially in government, lack guidance and consistency across data set fields and metadata. So we want to define standardized fields with focus on encoding geospatial location as well as census linked data. And some of our key design considerations, including clarity. So is this data presented in a format that is in a simple and human readable format? And two, is a standard lightweight? Would it be easy for city departments like San Jose to adapt their current processes and to follow the identified practices? And so we really want to create a standard such that data sets must capture the minimal amount of information needed to keep fields from containing duplicate information in really obscure formats. Next, I'll pass on back to Ramya to talk about our results.
So our contribution to this body of work is really with the introduction of our technical component and data augmentation piece that Joy mentioned. So given the gaps in analysis that we identified through our literature review, we demonstrate this framework on San Jose fire response data from 2020. We focus specifically on high priority medical incidents to which the fire department responded. So note that this framework does generalize to other response related data sets from San Jose, as well as fire response data from other cities like Detroit. Our workflow first features basic data cleaning and the generation of basic health metrics to evaluate data quality. Acknowledging and accounting for data quality issues can be another barrier for open data usage. So the metrics screened by our framework provide a more accessible starting point. We then showcase the potential for a US Census linked interface, which augments the original publicly available data with publicly available demographic information. This provides the necessary fields to enable any kind of equity-focused analysis. We then derive the basic data standard that, when followed, can help reduce another technical barrier to conducting analyses on open government data. Next, we enable rigorous statistical testing on local government response times by different demographic communities based on income, race, ethnicity, etc. And finally, this is then supported by the automatic generation of interactive visualizations. So understanding the data both in a statistical sense and more visually helps us more clearly identify areas to advance more equitable government resource allocation and policymaking.
So our framework is really created to reduce technical barriers to running equity analyses. The visualizations that Rama just showed allows citizens and constituents and internal departments to actually see the data and visualize it in a very clear way. So we want to provide a framework for cities that want to enable access to standardized data. And in doing so, we can very easily identify areas of opportunity to support equitable access for underserved communities. And in our presentation paper, we really focus on emergency service data, but our work is generalizable to any other data sets in local government work. And there's a lot of really cool insights that can drive equitable policymaking. So some other things we can look at include proximity to key resources such as schools and hospitals, water quality, and school funding allocation. But of course, there's also limitations to our work. There's a need for ongoing maintenance and support for our framework, which would be hard for local government. And also there could be unintended consequences that stem from an open source ability to automatically include demographic factors for any given data set. In addition, our system may be subject to misinterpretation and misuse. So our goal is to continue to iterate on this work by working with external interest group, constituents, and internal parties to prevent this from happening. And we're really interested in incorporating data insights in the policymaking process in the city by direct engagement with decision makers. So for instance, we had very lengthy chats with the San Jose Fire Department to figure out what are the next steps we can take away from our equity analyses. And our goal is to really expand our system to multiple cities across the US by working with peer cities like Long Beach and San Francisco and basically all across our current system.
So in conclusion, our work proposes a framework to reduce technical barriers to running equity analyses on open local government data. We demonstrate its potential capabilities showcasing how it may support data-driven, actionable policy recommendations to then inform equitable resource allocation in cities. As a next step, we will soon be launching this work on a public website. But with that, I'm happy to take any questions offline. Thank you for your time.